They called him the greatest. Muhammad Ali wasn't just a champion inside the ring. He was the voice of a generation, a poet with fists who floated like a butterfly and stung like a bee. His words carried as much force as his punches, shaping not only the sport of boxing, but the culture of an era. To millions, Ali's booming confidence and unshakable charisma felt eternal, as if his voice could never fade. But behind the myth of invincibility lies a lesser-told truth. There came a moment when Ali, the man who had never been silenced, began to lose the very weapon that defined him, his voice. This wasn't just another fight on his record. It was the night when punishment in the ring began to carve away not only at his body, but at his spirit. A night that sparked whispers about the long-term cost of greatness, whispers that would later echo into a cruel reality: Parkinson's disease. The man who once thundered through press conferences with rhymes and bravado would one day struggle to speak at all. In this story, we won't celebrate Ali, the invincible hero. Instead, we'll confront the human side of the greatest, the price he paid, the cracks that appeared long before the world noticed. This is the fight that changed everything. Before we dive in, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Boxing Chronicles so you don't miss the untold stories behind the legends. Muhammad Ali was born Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. on January 17, 1942, in Louisville, Kentucky, a city divided by lines of race and class. His father, Cassius Sr., painted billboards and signs, while his mother, Odessa, worked as a household domestic. Money was scarce, opportunities were limited, and the young Cassius grew up in a segregated world where the odds were stacked against him long before he laced a pair of gloves. Yet even as a boy, Ali had something different about him. He was loud, playful, and full of energy. A child who seemed to thrive on attention. He would stand in front of classmates, reciting rhymes, making jokes, and, above all, demanding to be heard. His voice, even then, was a tool, a way of carving out space in a world that tried to silence kids like him. At age 12, fate intervened. When his beloved bicycle was stolen, Ali stormed into a local gym to report it, telling police officer Joe Martin that he wanted to whoop the thief. Martin, who also trained young fighters, saw something in the boy's fire and told him to start training first before making any threats. That moment became the spark that lit Ali's journey into boxing. But boxing was more than just a sport to the young Cassius Clay. It was an escape from poverty, a weapon against the limitations of segregation, and a stage upon which his voice, both literal and figurative, could grow louder. In a way, boxing gave him more than a future. It amplified the gift he already carried. Before he was the greatest, Ali was just a boy from Louisville with a stolen bike, a restless spirit, and a voice that refused to be quiet. Cassius Clay's rise through the amateur ranks was meteoric. By the time he was a teenager, he was already collecting Golden Gloves titles, his footwork sharper and his hands faster than boys years older. But the world first took notice in 1960 when the 18-year-old from Louisville stepped onto the Olympic stage in Rome. With dazzling speed and a confidence beyond his years, Clay captured the light heavyweight gold medal, announcing to the world that a new force had arrived in boxing. Turning professional later that year, Clay brought with him a style that broke the mold. He fought with his hands low, his chin up, and his feet constantly in motion. Trainers called it reckless. Critics said he would be exposed the first time he faced a real puncher. But Clay made the ring his stage. He danced, he taunted, he shouted predictions in rhyme, telling reporters the exact round in which he would win, and then doing exactly that. His mouth became as much a weapon as his jab. Still, his unorthodox approach came with growing pains. Many doubted whether his style could withstand the power of seasoned heavyweights. Early in his career, he was knocked down by Henry Cooper, proof to skeptics that he was vulnerable. Yet each time, Clay bounced back, not only physically, but verbally, turning near disaster into theater. Every brush with failure seemed to sharpen both his boxing skills and his bravado. By the early 1960s, Cassius Clay had established himself as more than a prospect. He was a phenomenon, a boxer who sold tickets not only with his fists, but with his voice. And it was that combination, speed, charisma, and audacity, that would soon propel him to the fight of his life against Sonny Liston. Muhammad Ali's training camps were as legendary as his fights. To outsiders, it often seemed like chaos, music blasting, reporters crowding the gym, Ali shouting jokes and poems in between sparring sessions. But beneath the spectacle was a grueling, almost punishing routine that forged one of the most unique heavyweights the sport had ever seen. Ali's mornings began before dawn. He would lace up his shoes and run miles through the streets, often 6 miles or more, talking and joking the entire way. While most fighters trained in silence, Ali used his runs as theater, shouting predictions, rhyming insults at imaginary opponents, and even stopping to shadowbox in front of curious onlookers. To Ali, stamina was more than just physical. It was mental dominance. If he could run and talk without losing his breath, how could an opponent hope to match him in the ring? Inside the gym, Ali's training blended fundamentals with flair. He worked the heavy bag relentlessly, not only for power, but for rhythm. He treated it like an opponent, darting in and out, unleashing flurries, then slipping away before the bag could swing back. On the speed bag, his hands became a blur, the steady rhythm echoing like a drumbeat that filled the room. Sparring was where Ali truly shined, often speaking to his partners mid-round, taunting them while slipping punches with head movements so sharp it looked like choreography. His goal wasn't just to win the exchange, it was to break the opponent's spirit. What set Ali apart wasn't just what he did, but how he did it. He rejected the traditional heavyweight style of plodding forward behind a guard. Instead, he crafted a style built on movement, reflexes, and psychological warfare. He trained his legs to dance for 15 rounds, his reflexes to avoid punches by mere inches, and his lungs to endure a pace that left others exhausted. Ali's voice was present in every aspect of his preparation. He talked while training, he talked while sparring, and he talked while resting. For him, words were part of conditioning, proof of his confidence, a way to convince himself and everyone watching that he could not be beaten. It was as if he were rehearsing not just for fights, but for history. Yet there was a cost: the constant sparring with bigger men, the willingness to stand in and absorb punches when his legs grew tired, the sheer volume of rounds he fought in the gym. These habits took a toll. While Ali's training created the greatest, it also quietly laid the groundwork for the physical decline that would later silence his booming voice. Ali's camps became legendary not because they were unusual, but because they revealed the contradiction at his core. He was a man who trained harder than anyone, who demanded perfection from himself, and who used words as a weapon just as sharp as his fists. His preparation didn't just make him unbeatable, it made him unforgettable. What made Muhammad Ali different wasn't just his fists, but the way he thought. He believed victory was decided long before the opening bell. For Ali, fights were as much mental battles as physical wars, and he crafted a psychological edge that overwhelmed opponents before a punch was ever thrown. Ali mastered the art of visualization. He would imagine himself dominating, rehearsing every feint, every dodge, every moment of triumph. When he stood before the press, boasting and rhyming, he wasn't only selling tickets, he was reinforcing his own belief that defeat was impossible. His confidence was contagious, spreading from himself to his fans, while simultaneously infecting opponents with doubt. Discipline was the backbone of his psyche. Despite his charm and playfulness, Ali lived with the strict regimen of a soldier. He trained relentlessly, avoided vices, and embraced hardship. Where others saw exhaustion, Ali saw opportunity. He once declared, "I hated every minute of training, but I said, don't quit. Suffer now and live the rest of your life as a champion." Those words reflected his philosophy. Pain was temporary, but greatness was eternal. Psychological warfare was perhaps his sharpest tool. Ali ridiculed Sonny Liston as a big ugly bear, mocked George Foreman as a lumbering giant, and provoked Joe Frazier with endless insults. Some called it cruelty, but Ali understood the truth. If he could get inside an opponent's head, half the fight was already won. This mindset created an aura of invincibility, a sense that Ali wasn't merely fighting men, but destiny itself. Yet, it also magnified the tragedy of his later years. For a man who built his identity on words, on the power of speech and self-belief, losing his voice wasn't just a physical condition, it was a psychological wound. Muhammad Ali's career was defined by a series of battles that went beyond sport, moments where boxing became theater, politics, and human drama all at once. These fights built his legend, but they also left scars that would eventually claim his voice. The first came in 1964, when the brash young Cassius Clay challenged Sonny Liston for the heavyweight crown. Few gave him a chance. Liston was a monster, a man feared even outside the ring, but Clay's speed and audacity stunned the world. After 6 rounds, Liston quit on his stool, and a 22-year-old loudmouth from Louisville proclaimed, "I shook up the world." In that moment, a new era began. Clay became Ali, heavyweight champion of the world, and the voice of the underdog. But Ali's greatest battles came after his prime. The Rumble in the Jungle in 1974 against George Foreman is often remembered as his tactical masterpiece. Foreman was younger, stronger, and considered unbeatable. Yet Ali's rope-a-dope strategy, leaning against the ropes, absorbing punishment, and waiting for Foreman to tire, turned the fight into one of the sport's most shocking upsets. When Ali dropped Foreman in the 8th round, it wasn't just a victory, it was resurrection. Then came the Thrilla in Manila in 1975, the third and final war against Joe Frazier. Under the scorching Philippine sun, the two men punished each other for 14 brutal rounds. Ali would later admit it was the closest he had ever felt to death. His victory came only when Frazier's corner refused to let their fighter continue. The bout cemented Ali's place in history, but it also extracted a devastating toll. The punishment he absorbed that night became an early crack in his armor, the kind that no amount of charisma or bravado could hide. By the late 1970s, Ali's once lively voice began to slow, his speech slightly slurred. Observers dismissed it as fatigue, or simply the wear of a long career. But history would reveal that these were the first whispers of something greater. The cost of wars like Manila, the unseen damage carried from nights when Ali chose to endure instead of retreat. Ali's highlights are immortal: 3-time heavyweight champion, 56 victories, 37 knockouts, the man who fought giants and conquered them. Yet behind the numbers was the paradox. His most thrilling triumphs also paved the road to his silence. For Muhammad Ali, glory was never a straight line. Behind the curtain of triumphs came moments of struggle that tested not only his body, but his identity. In 1971, Ali faced Joe Frazier in the fight of the century. It was Ali's first professional loss, a brutal reminder that even the greatest was human. The defeat shook him, but it did not break him. Ali returned, fought tirelessly, and eventually reclaimed his supremacy with victories in their rematches. Each setback seemed to fuel his resilience, reinforcing his belief that greatness was measured not in perfection, but in persistence. Yet the most telling challenge came in the twilight of his career. By 1978, Ali had lost his heavyweight crown to the young Leon Spinks, a fighter with only 7 professional bouts to his name. For many, it was a sign that time had caught up. Ali, however, refused to accept the narrative. Just months later, he returned to outbox Spinks in a rematch, reclaiming the heavyweight title for a historic 3rd time. It was a comeback that only deepened his legend. But those comebacks carried a hidden price. Each return demanded more from a body already worn thin by years of punishment. His speech slowed, his reflexes dulled, and the once boundless energy began to fade. The man who once danced around the ring now struggled against younger, hungrier fighters. By the early 1980s, the signs of decline were undeniable. Ali's challenges and comebacks revealed both the brilliance and the tragedy of his career. He refused to quit, even when his body begged him to, That refusal cemented his place as the greatest, but it also brought him closer to the silence that would follow. Muhammad Ali's legacy extends far beyond the ropes. His record alone, 56 wins, 37 knockouts, 3-time heavyweight champion, would secure him a place among the greatest. But numbers never told the full story of Ali. What made him timeless was his voice, not only in the literal sense, but in how he spoke for millions who had none. Ali refused to fight in Vietnam, sacrificing his titles and prime years for principles he believed in. He spoke unapologetically about race, religion, and justice at a time when doing so could cost a man everything. His words empowered the powerless, challenged authority, and turned a boxer into a global icon of resistance. Even as Parkinson's began to steal his speech, the echo of that voice remained. In silence, he became an even greater symbol of sacrifice. His influence on boxing was profound. Ali's style redefined what a heavyweight could be: fast, graceful, poetic. Fighters like Larry Holmes, Sugar Ray Leonard, and even modern champions drew inspiration from his blend of athleticism and charisma. Beyond the ring, his humanitarian work, from visiting war zones to supporting charities, ensured that his impact was measured not in belts, but in lives touched. The greatest lesson Ali left us was not about victory, but about cost. Greatness demands sacrifice. For Ali, the price of immortality was his health, his body, and eventually his voice. Yet even when words failed him, the world still heard him. Through his courage, his humor, and his unshakable will, Ali taught us that true greatness isn't about never falling. It's about rising again and again, until the world believes. Muhammad Ali was more than a champion. He was a force of nature, a voice that reshaped boxing, culture, and the world. He wasn't called the greatest because he never fell. He earned that title because he kept rising, even as the weight of time and punishment pressed him down. His voice, once thunderous and unshakable, eventually faltered. Yet in that silence, Ali's legacy only grew louder. The fight that began to take his voice was not the end of his story, but the beginning of a new chapter. One where Ali inspired not with his words, but with his courage to endure. Watching him light the Olympic torch in 1996, his hands trembling yet unbowed, reminded the world that greatness is not about invulnerability. It is about resilience, sacrifice, and the power to inspire long after the final bell. Ali's journey forces us to ask, what is the price of greatness, and would we be willing to pay it? For Ali, the cost was his health, his body, and his ability to speak, but in return, he gained immortality. So now we ask you, do you think Ali's legacy would shine as brightly if he had never lost his voice? Share your thoughts below, and if this story moved you, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Boxing Chronicles, where we bring you the untold stories of boxing's legends.